Welcome to episode 110 of the G2 on 5G. It's the latest inside scoop on everything 5G. We cover 6 topics in about 20 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, and joining me again this week is fellow analyst Anshel Sag. Let's get started with my first topic. So news broke this week that an integrator, ExteNet, announced a private 5G deployment for Austin's Circuit of the Americas. And I've got a personal take on why I think this is important. So I attended the Formula One. So CoTA hosts the US Grand Prix. There's been an expansion of that to Miami, I believe, and other cities over time.
Vegas next year.
What's that?
Vegas next year.
Vegas next year, yeah. CoTA did get a renewal. But I got to tell you, so I was at the event last year, and the cellular coverage was terrible. In fact, my cousin and I went, and he didn't download the tickets in advance. He tried to get on the network at the racetrack, could not get connectivity. Apparently, CoTA did not, figure this out and call the AT&Ts and Verizons and T-Mobiles of the world to bring Colts and that sort of thing out to provide additional support and throughput. So what's interesting about this is apparently ExteNet has been a longtime partner of CoTA, but their goal is to provide increased coverage, obviously, and they're going to do that through a private 5G network. If you're not familiar with CoTA, there's also a music venue there as well. And so the applications, I mean, my experience was, again, you couldn't download tickets. When you went to concession stands, all of those systems around the racetrack are on LTE, and the concession stands backed up because there was poor connectivity, and it was just an oversubscription of the network. So a 5G private deployment should address that. And according to ExteNet, they're talking about some of the benefits would obviously be entry ticketing and parking, which was my experience, digital signage, real-time fan applications. And that was the other issue. So CoTA has a great fan app, so you can follow the race on your phone, but it was not functional because the network was oversubscribed there. So it'll support that, as well as personalized fan engagement, probably some mixed reality solutions that are right up your alley as well. So, from my perspective, this is a long time coming. And I'm hoping that a private 5G deployment at CoTA, and hopefully it's ready by the next Grand Prix this year, will make all the difference in the world, from a customer and attendee experience. But would love to get your thoughts.
I'm not going to get my hopes up. I believe CoTA, the US Grand Prix, is usually in October.
It is.
So probably not. That's only like 2 months away.
Right. Good point.
3 months away, basically. So my expectations are very low.
Yeah.
But I can speak from experience. I've been to CoTA for an F1 race as well, and the experience for connectivity was absolutely horrendous.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention just like overall infrastructure of getting in and out of there. So I think the owners of CoTA need to reconsider their infrastructure choices, because it's also, I believe, a soccer venue is in that area as well. So
there is a minor league soccer team that plays there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just think that this is a long time coming, and they probably need more than what they're committing to.
Yeah, and I'm wearing my rally hat today, praying that, something might be done, at a minimum, hopefully. And I provided some feedback because actually I have a friend that knows some of the ownership there, and basically provided, my assistance to help them just, work with the public mobile network operator providers to fortify the capacity there. But you're right. I mean, this is just announced. We're only a few months away from the next race. This is probably going to be a 2023, effective date. But I'm encouraged to see it. And you and I have talked on other podcasts just about how private 5G deployments, millimeter wave in particular, could be really compelling for sporting venues, and this would be a great example of that. But with that, let's move to your first topic this week. And finally, India is rolling out its 5G auction. And I believe I read the news on this. There are 4 operators that are involved, but you want to go into a little more detail about the mechanics of it all.
Yeah, so the three big operators in India, which are Reliance Jio, Bharti Airtel, and Vodafone, between the three of them, they actually bid uh, to the tune of $18.6 billion,
Mhm.
which is double what the government estimated they would bid for the spectrum. If you actually do this into rupees, it's 1.5 trillion rupees, which is obviously a very hard number to conceptualize. So
Right.
$18.6 billion. And this spectrum will be, you know, essentially the first rollout sometime in September, October,
Mhm.
which is, I don't know what, 3 years after it happened in the US.
Right.
So there's a considerable amount of lag. There is a lot of spectrum that went up for sale. There's 72 gigahertz of airwaves for a 20-year tenure, and that's anywhere from 26 gigahertz to 600 megahertz in spectrum.
Yeah.
So
It's pretty
um,
complete, right? It's low, mid, and high band spectrum.
yeah, it's all kinds of spectrum. And I think they're trying to enable a really good mix, which I think if you're behind, you might as well.
Right.
Um, because I think if you look at the market today, most countries are still looking to deploy mid-band or high band or low band. So um, if they can do all three at once, that's obviously quite the undertaking. But they could also save some money by being able to deploy, mid and low band together at once. So we'll
Yeah.
see what happens. But this is a big deal because India is the world's second biggest cellular market.
Yeah, and it's interesting that they're doing such a swath of spectrum. And as I kind of followed up on the news, the thought process there, because it's such a wide swath, that they're not expecting to see like what we saw in the US with C-band and that sort of that over escalation and
The
cost and
frenzy.
sort of thing. The other interesting thing, you mentioned the three big mobile operators in India that are participating. There's a fourth group. They kind of threw their cards down because each of
Adani, was that
yeah,
a group?
yeah, each of these operators and this fourth service provider, they had to put some upfront money, earnest money, to be able to participate in the auction. And this kind of fourth entrant put the least amount in. But it's interesting, they're not planning to launch a consumer network deployment. They want to focus on private. That's really interesting because the news out of India, the mobile network operators, they're almost fearful of private network deployments and being locked out of the monetization opportunity. So the operators in India are sort of taking a different tack there, and it's interesting to see this fourth player come in, and it'll be interesting to see once the dust settles, the spectrum allocation between these four players. But it's just interesting because you've got this wild card in the mix that wants to go do private, where the other operators don't want to do that. So it's quite interesting, but we'll keep tabs on it. Let's go to my second topic this week, and I want to talk again about NTT. And I'm reading a lot about them in the news lately, and they're actually partnering with Intel, and they're going to help BMW deploy a 5G test bed. And I want to kind of talk about some of the expected business outcomes. Now, BMW has been working with Deutsche Telekom. You and I have talked about that on prior podcasts. But this is this test deployment is at one of their facilities, and I'm gonna mispronounce it, Dingolfing in Bavaria. And what they want to do is they want to test kind of material movement. They call them tugger trains that are used to transport components for the cars back and forth through the manufacturing facilities. They also want to trial a blockchain-based system to trace supplies, which I think is a great use case as well. And Intel has partnered. NTT obviously has a private 5G platform, but Intel is supplying the edge compute. And we've talked about edge compute on past podcasts as well, sort of a way to sort of supercharge the 5G applications. And so again, this is a test bed, and in the article that I read, they were very, kind of careful to state that, BMW is deploying other private 5G production networks, but that this was specifically kind of suited to do some tests. And actually, BMW has an innovation hub that's in the same sort of location. And I think this is pretty positive. These use cases are pretty, from my perspective, obvious. But and certainly, we're hearing a lot about car manufacturers adopting private 5G deployments to further digitalize their operations and bring more efficiency. But what are your thoughts?
This sounds like BMW's modernizing their factory.
Yeah.
They already agreed to use T-Mobile for their 5G in their vehicles in the US. So we'll see where that goes long term. But being able to deploy 5G in a factory is becoming an increasing application of private 5G.
I agree. Let's go to your second topic. And T-Mobile announced their earnings this week, and you want to kind of talk about that, but you're also going to do a couple extra bonus topics here. You want to talk about fixed wireless access and Comcast, as well as some other FWA deployments.
Yeah, so first of all, T-Mobile had a really good quarter. They reported $19.7 billion in revenue, which is actually down slightly from the year ago quarter, which missed analyst expectations, but they added 1.7 million new customers, which is up from 1.3 million a year ago.
Yeah,
which is a big deal. And Mike Sievert, the CEO of T-Mobile, said that they're expecting to have between 6.6 to 6.3 million new subscribers this year, which is up from an all-time high of 5.5 million last year. So they're actually expecting subscribers to grow this year in spite of all the things that are happening in the economy right now, in terms of demand. And they also said that they added 560,000 broadband users for its internet service, which is even faster than the first quarter of this year, which was 338,000. So almost half of the users that they gained this quarter were from fixed wireless, which leads me to the report from the GSA that says that in 2021 there was an increase of 5G fixed wireless CPE shipments of 162%, which is 3.6 million units, and they expect this year to be 7.6 million, which is essentially more than a doubling of last year. And based on T-Mobile's performance right now, that seems to be the case. So I think T-Mobile is kind of like one of the big drivers of this. When you consider that they're doing, 500,000 per quarter in terms of broadband users, that's 2 million in a total year if they keep this trajectory. So if they do 2 million this year, that's going to be more than a quarter of the entire world's CPE shipments for 5G fixed wireless. So that dovetails into broadband and a broadband announcement that Comcast said that their broadband business stopped growing for the first time ever, which I have a feeling has to do with T-Mobile and Verizon's 5G fixed wireless businesses, which are both growing fairly well for both companies.
Right.
Fixed wireless is the only bright spot in Verizon's business right now.
Right.
And T-Mobile's, it's like, it's obviously a big driver for them, but it's a part of an overall good story for T-Mobile. And as a result, I just think that we're seeing a lot of these different trends kind of happening. And, you and I have been talking about how, 5G fixed wireless was going to be a big opportunity for the industry early on.
Yeah.
Lo and behold, it's actually happening now. And what's the enabler? Mid-band. I had a friend who recently posted on Facebook that he has Comcast, and actually it wasn't Comcast, he had Charter. Charter, which is the other competitor to Comcast. He was getting the same speeds, roughly 450 megabits, slightly higher latency, but he's paying $20 a month less, and he's much happier with the service. Yeah. So, I think this trend is going to continue as more people discover that they have a much better experience on 5G FWA than they do on, either Charter or Spectrum or
Yeah.
whoever their local ISP might be.
No, yeah, I mean, it's pretty compelling, and I'm not surprised that that Comcast is seeing what they're experiencing right now. I mean, I have Comcast service in two of my rental property homes, and it's super expensive. It's like $60-$70 just for internet, and the performance is not great. And so I may actually do the Pepsi challenge, and T-Mobile's got this very frictionless program where you can for, I think it's like it's a kind of a no risk trial, and I'm going to do the Pepsi challenge and test it out, and I may convert those two properties to 5G FWA in Fort Collins and Islamorada, Florida. So yeah, no, it's super compelling. I think there are some mobile network operators that state that in deploying FWA, you're gonna put a lot of users on spectrum, and that's going to sort of detract from those mobile users. But it's not slowing T-Mobile down at all, right? Cool. Well, let's move to my third and final topic, and I want to talk about news that came out today. It's actually on Mobile World Live, and the United Kingdom announced a partnership with South Korea to further 5G and 6G innovation. And it's a smart move from my perspective. You and I have talked about South Korea. They've absolutely been the leader in deploying 5G. They've been ahead of the curve. They've also been ahead of the curve with respect to 5G use cases and applications. So what's really interesting, the United Kingdom established a fund previously earmarking 250 million pounds, and it's focused on open networking. And Open RAN comes into play here. There's no surprise that that the UK is focused on this, because there is a lot of Huawei and ZTE infrastructure deployed in England, and they're going through the rip and replace of that. But one of the things that they're partnering with South Korea on is putting an earmarking almost a 4 million pound purse that's going to reward early stage research with universities and just the industry in general to focus on open and interoperable telecom systems using 5G and 6G with an emphasis on power management. And for our viewers and listeners that aren't aware of this, power, from an OpEx perspective, is one of the biggest, cost to mobile network operators. So I think it's innovative that the UK is focused on this. I think it's even more innovative that they recognize South Korea's leadership in 5G, and they're partnering with South Korea to drive innovation. And I'm sure the South Korean market will benefit from it as well. But what are your thoughts?
I think it's a good idea. I think when you consider that the UK and Korea both had very similar 5G launches, I could see them kind of aligning on 6G as well.
Yeah.
And I think that there's going to be demand for collaboration between countries with smaller R&D budgets.
Right.
So I think it's a great idea for Korea and the UK to collaborate, and I think there'll be net positive for everybody.
I agree. It's also interesting. I'll mention this. So in Europe, there's been a lot of discussion around RAN sharing and building these radio access networks and having operators kind of pool their resources to build them out. So that's not dissimilar from what we're seeing with this particular partnership. So it's innovative. It'll be interesting to see the fruits of it, and we'll definitely keep tabs on it. But let's move to your third and final topic this week, and you want to talk about Qualcomm. They had another bang up quarter with respect to earnings, and they announced a partnership, a new partnership or a renewal with Samsung, right?
Yeah. So actually, I wanted to kind of blend a multitude of topics together: Qualcomm's earnings and Apple's earnings, but also an extension of Qualcomm's relationship with Samsung, which I think are all very closely related.
Cool.
So Qualcomm's earnings, they crushed on earnings itself, but then they guided that they expect the next quarter not to be as good in terms of profitability due to the challenging economic environment around the world.
Sure.
So their shares dipped, even though they basically beat on revenue and on profit. And their gross margin was also slightly down to 56% from 57.8%. So overall, Qualcomm looks pretty good. And during this announcement, they also announced an extension of their partnership with Samsung, I believe through 2030,
Okay.
which would set them a 7-year agreement. It extends their existing agreement from now, which is I think expected to expire in 2024 or 2023, and then it expands it into 5G and 6G licensing, and it increases Qualcomm's share of Samsung Galaxy S phones from the existing 75% up to an undisclosed amount. Let's just say closer to 100%,
Right.
which might mean that Europeans might finally get Snapdragon chips in their Samsung phones at the high end.
Right.
And then they also said that they'll expand into other areas, not just on phones. So they will partner on PCs, tablets, and XR, which is really interesting because Samsung hasn't actually announced an XR headset yet.
Right.
So they're rumored to be working on one, but it's interesting because Microsoft and ByteDance already have announced partnerships with Qualcomm to get chips from them for XR. So that was an interesting announcement. And then Apple today announced earnings, and they basically had profit fall in that quarter, but revenue continued to increase due to increased iPhone sales. And if you look at the global smartphone market share, I mean, it kind of makes sense because smartphone market share did dip about 9% in terms of shipments.
Yeah.
And the only two companies that grew in shipments last quarter were Apple and Samsung. So basically, we've had a lot of earnings. There have been a lot of shifts in terms of market share globally. It seems like Qualcomm's pretty solid. What was interesting was that Cristiano, the CEO of Qualcomm, refused to answer the question of whether or not they will see a revenue / profit upside due to the rumored delay of Apple's modem design. Because originally at the Qualcomm Investor Day, I don't know, like last October, they said that they expect to only have 20% of the business that they do now with Apple due to their own modem being developed. But if that's actually getting delayed, then there's a possibility that maybe they get that additional revenue and profitability, and that might be like a surprise for Q3. So we'll see what happens there, but that's kind of the overall story there. And yeah, I think that's kind of it. I'd love to hear your take.
Yeah, so it sounds like Cristiano is sandbagging a little bit with Apple. I mean, I'm expecting to see an upside, given Apple's stumbles, with their own modems. I think there's additional upside for Qualcomm with Samsung as well. So you were kind of, walking through the end devices and that sort of thing. And from an infrastructure perspective, Samsung Networks, we've talked about them on prior podcasts. I mean, there are a lot of different things that I think Samsung could leverage from Qualcomm. Qualcomm has done this Open RAN accelerator card reference design, and Samsung is very, very focused on vRAN and Open RAN, and that's something that I think Samsung could lean into as well. So I think both Apple and Samsung provide some significant upside to Qualcomm, over the next, several quarters, despite, what we're experiencing with now it's officially inflation. I saw
Recession.
Recession, driven by inflation. We've had 2 consecutive quarters of GDP, decline, and that's going to cause some people to slow down and that sort of thing. But I think the future looks very bright, for Qualcomm. They continue to really drive the 5G ecosystem. So time will tell. But hey, buddy, it was another great podcast. Why don't you take us home?
Absolutely. We hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. If anyone out there would like to provide insights on a specific 5G topic for a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Will is at WellTownTech and I'm at Anshel. We hope you have a great weekend, and please tune in again next week.